I thought I knew my husband. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, a beautiful home. Then one afternoon, while cleaning his home office, his nameplate fell. What I found underneath wasn't just a secret. It was an entire life I knew nothing about, and it destroyed everything I thought was real. If you've ever questioned whether you truly know someone, this story will shake you to your core. Stay until the end, because the twist will leave you speechless. And if this resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this need to be heard. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. My name is Claire, and for 15 years, I believed I was living a dream life. My husband David was a successful commercial real estate developer. We had 2 beautiful children, Sophie, who's 12, and Ben, who's 8. We lived in a gorgeous colonial home in the suburbs, the kind with the white picket fence and the perfectly manicured lawn. I was the woman who had it all, or so everyone thought. I hosted dinner parties, volunteered at the school fundraisers, attended book club every Thursday night. My life looked picture perfect from the outside. But here's the thing about perfect lives. They're usually built on carefully constructed lies. David and I had fallen into a comfortable routine over the years. He'd leave for the office every morning at 7 sharp, kissing me on the forehead before heading out the door. He'd come home around 7 in the evening, just in time for dinner with the kids. Weekends were for soccer games and trips to the farmer's market. Our anniversary dinners were at the same Italian restaurant we'd been going to for a decade. We were comfortable, maybe not passionate anymore, but comfortable. And I'd convinced myself that was enough. That's what marriage becomes after 15 years, right? Comfortable. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I ignored. The way David was always protective of his home office, saying he needed his space to focus on work. How he'd sometimes seem distracted during our conversations, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. The unexplained late meetings that became more frequent over the past few years. That new cologne he started wearing last spring that I never bought him. But I trusted him. God, I trusted him completely. And that trust almost cost me everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when my entire world shattered. The kids were at school, and I had a few hours to myself. I decided to surprise David by deep cleaning his home office. He'd been complaining about how cluttered it had become, and I thought it would be a nice gesture. I was dusting his mahogany desk when I noticed his nameplate was loose. You know the kind, engraved brass on a wooden base that says David Patterson, Real Estate Development. It had been sitting on his desk for years, a gift from his business partner when they first opened their firm. As I was cleaning around it, the nameplate suddenly fell, hitting the desk with a sharp crack. The wooden base split slightly, and that's when I saw it. Taped to the underside was a small brass key, the kind that opens a house door. Attached to the key was a tiny piece of paper with an address written in David's handwriting, an address on the other side of town, in a neighborhood we never visited. My hands started shaking as I held that key. Every instinct in my body told me something was wrong. Why would David hide a key under his nameplate? Why this particular address? I stood there in his office for what felt like an eternity, just staring at that key, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was a surprise property he was developing for us. Maybe it was an investment property he hadn't mentioned yet. Maybe. But deep down, in that place where women's intuition lives, I knew it was something darker. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation, but I couldn't shake the feeling. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I got in my car, plugged that address into my GPS, and I drove across town to see what was there. The address led me to a quiet street, lined with older duplexes. Nothing fancy, but well-maintained. Mature trees, small front yards, the kind of neighborhood where young families and working professionals live. I parked my car across the street from the address on the paper, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat there for over an hour, watching, waiting, not even sure what I was looking for. Part of me wanted to just drive home and forget the whole thing. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, waiting for something to prove my suspicions wrong. And then I saw her. A woman stepped out of the duplex. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, and she was pregnant, very pregnant, maybe 6 or 7 months along. She locked the door behind her with a brass key, identical to the one I had clutched in my hand, got into a modest sedan, and drove away. I couldn't breathe. The world started spinning. Who was this woman? Why did she have a key to this place? Why was David hiding this address under his nameplate? I sat in my car, tears streaming down my face, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But in my gut, I already knew. And it was destroying me. I drove home in a daze. I made it back before the kids got out of school. I picked them up, asked them about their day, made them snacks, helped Ben with his homework. I moved through the motions of being a mother while my entire world was crumbling inside. When David came home that evening, I watched him differently, really watched him. The way he kissed my cheek without really looking at me. The way he seemed relieved when I didn't ask many questions about his day. The way he mentioned, almost casually, that he had a late meeting on Thursday night. I made a decision right then. I needed to know the truth, and I needed to see it with my own eyes. That Thursday, I told David I was going to book club. I got dressed, grabbed my purse, and left the house at the usual time. But instead of driving to my friend's house, I parked down the street from David's office and waited. At 7:30, I watched him walk out to his car, and then I followed him. He drove straight to that duplex. I watched from down the street as he parked in the driveway, pulled out his own brass key, and let himself in. Through the front window, I could see everything. The pregnant woman came to greet him. He wrapped his arms around her, pulled her close, placed his hand gently on her swollen belly. The way he looked at her, God, the way he looked at her. It was tender and loving and intimate. It was the way he used to look at me 15 years ago. I sat in my car outside that duplex, and I completely fell apart. Silent, gasping sobs that made my whole body shake. This wasn't just an affair. This was a whole other life, a whole other family. While I was home making dinner and helping with homework and being the perfect suburban wife, my husband was living an entirely separate existence with another woman who was carrying his child. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to know everything first. The next morning, I took money from our emergency fund and hired a private investigator. I know that sounds dramatic, but I needed facts. I needed evidence. I needed to understand the full scope of what David had been hiding from me. 3 days later, the investigator handed me a folder that changed my life forever. The woman's name was Rachel. She was 34 years old, worked as a nurse at the county hospital. She and David had been in a relationship for 4 years. 4 years. She was 6 months pregnant with his child, a boy. David was listed as the father on all her medical documents. He'd been paying her rent, her utilities, her car payment, everything. He had a completely separate bank account I knew nothing about, a second phone I'd never seen. He'd been living 2 full lives, and he'd been doing it so seamlessly that I never suspected a thing. But it got worse, so much worse. I started going through our financial records with a lawyer, really digging into where our money had been going. David had been siphoning funds from our savings for years. Over $200,000 was missing from accounts I thought were secure. Money that was supposed to be for our children's college education, for our retirement, for our future. He'd been transferring it to his secret account to support his other life. We weren't just emotionally bankrupt. We were heading toward financial ruin, and I hadn't even known it. I spent a week gathering evidence, copying documents, taking screenshots, organizing everything into a file that my lawyer said was airtight. During that week, I had to pretend everything was normal. I had to sit across from David at dinner and smile. I had to listen to him talk about his day, knowing that half of what he said were lies. I had to watch him tuck our children into bed and tell them he loved them, knowing he was building another family behind our backs. It was the hardest week of my life, but I was strategic. I wasn't going to confront him until I had everything in place, until I had the power. Friday night, I sent Sophie and Ben to my mother's house for a sleepover. I cooked David's favorite meal, steak with garlic mashed potatoes and roasted vegetables. I set the table with candles. I poured him a glass of his favorite wine. He thought I was being romantic. He smiled at me across the table and said, "This is nice. We should do this more often." I let him finish his meal. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out that brass key, and placed it in the center of the table. The color drained from David's face. His fork clattered onto his plate. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. I calmly laid out everything in front of him. The photographs of him entering the duplex, the bank statements showing the missing money, the private investigator's report about Rachel and the pregnancy. Every single piece of evidence arranged neatly on our dining room table. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. David tried to explain. He stammered through apologies and excuses. He said he'd fallen in love with Rachel 3 years ago, but couldn't bring himself to leave me and the kids. He said he was trying to figure out how to handle the situation. He claimed he loved both of us, that he never meant to hurt anyone. He actually said those words, "I never meant to hurt anyone," as if maintaining 2 families for years and stealing money from his children's future was some kind of accident. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I just looked at him and said, "You don't get to choose anymore. I'm choosing for you." Then I told him I'd already filed for divorce, that my lawyer had all the evidence of his financial fraud, that his business partner, who happened to be my brother-in-law, had been informed about everything, including the embezzled funds. Their partnership agreement had strict morality clauses, and David had violated every single one. He wasn't just losing his family, he was losing his business, his reputation, everything. David broke down completely. He begged me not to do this. He promised to end things with Rachel, to focus on our family, to make it right. But it was too late. Years too late. I told him to pack a bag and leave. He refused at first, said it was his house too. That's when I delivered the final blow. I had already spoken to Rachel. The look on his face when I said those words, I'll never forget it. Pure terror. I told him I'd driven to that duplex earlier in the week, knocked on Rachel's door, and showed her everything. The bank statements proving he'd been stealing from his legitimate family. The timeline showing he'd lied to her about when he was leaving me. The financial projections showing that he couldn't actually afford to support 2 families, which meant he'd been making promises to her that he could never keep. Rachel had believed she was in a relationship with a man who was separated from his wife, working through a difficult divorce, planning a future with her. Instead, she discovered she was the other woman in a web of lies. And the man she loved had no intention of ever fully committing to her or their child. She ended it. Right there, while I was standing in her living room, she called David and ended it. The domino effect was swift and brutal. Within 2 weeks, David lost everything. His partnership in the firm dissolved due to the morality clause violations and financial improprieties. Rachel filed for child support, which he now owed to 2 families. Our divorce proceedings moved forward, and with all the evidence of his fraud and affair, the settlement heavily favored me and the children. I got the house, primary custody, and substantial financial support. David had to liquidate his investment properties to cover legal fees. The community we'd been part of for over a decade completely turned on him. Our country club membership was revoked. Former friends stopped returning his calls. He became a cautionary tale, whispered about at PTA meetings and dinner parties. The man who'd had it all and threw it away for a double life he couldn't sustain. A year has passed since that Tuesday afternoon when David's nameplate fell and revealed his secret. My life looks completely different now. I went back to work, returning to the interior design career I'd abandoned when Sophie was born. Turns out, Clients respect a woman who rebuilt her life from the ground up. My business is thriving. The kids are in therapy, and while they struggled at first, they're healing. They're learning that their father's choices weren't their fault, and that sometimes people we love disappoint us in ways we never imagined. I saw David last month at Sophie's school play. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. He's living in a cramped apartment across town, working as a property manager for someone else's company. He sees Ben and Sophie every other weekend, and he has supervised visitation with his son from Rachel. She moved on quickly, found a genuine partner who stepped up to help raise the baby. David pays child support to both families, and it's eating up most of his income. The life he tried to build in secret collapsed under the weight of its own lies. People ask me if I feel guilty, if I think I was too harsh, but here's what I learned. I didn't cause David's karma. His choices did. Karma isn't about revenge or cruelty. It's about natural consequences. When you build a life on deception, eventually it crumbles. It has to. The foundation is too weak to hold the weight. That loose nameplate wasn't an accident. It was a gift. The truth always finds a way to surface, and I'm grateful it happened when it did, before he could do more damage. My only regret is not trusting my instincts sooner, not asking more questions when things felt off. But I've forgiven myself for that. We trust the people we love. That's not a weakness. That's what makes us human. I'm stronger now than I've ever been. I know who I am outside of being someone's wife. I've rediscovered passions I'd buried for years. I've built a life for my children that's based on honesty and resilience. And I've learned that sometimes the worst betrayal becomes the catalyst for becoming the best version of yourself. That secret under David's nameplate didn't just change my life, it saved it. That secret under his nameplate didn't just change my life, it saved it. I learned that karma isn't about revenge, it's about natural consequences. David didn't lose everything because I was cruel. He lost it because lies always crumble and truth always wins. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt that gut instinct that something was wrong, trust it. Like this video if you believe in the power of truth. Subscribe for more real stories about resilience and survival. And share this with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they know. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything? I read every single one. Remember, you deserve honesty, you deserve respect, and you deserve a life built on truth, not lies. Thank you for listening to my story.